Hi, everyone. We are talking about authoritative parenting today. And maybe you are a parent or an expecting parent. It doesn't matter really where you are in your parenting journey. You may have little ones, you may already have teenagers, but we are going to talk about the fundamentals of what it looks like for authoritative parenting. There are many different kinds of parenting. This is not an advocacy podcast to be like, oh, this is the only way you should do things. But this is something that is very effective in crisis management. And if you are looking for just specifically like how do I approach and proactively implement solutions so that hopefully I'm not dealing with crises in the future, this is definitely one to implement in your toolbox of other things that you may be utilizing. So let's dive right in. We are going to talk about the fact that parenting styles are really just a reoccurring pendulum swing of where you may have been in your own childhood experiences. So maybe you experienced a lot of discipline in the home, and maybe that's why you do or don't discipline in the home. And maybe you didn't have any discipline at all. Maybe you had an absentee parent. And so you maybe feeling like you are very involved in your kids' lives, and so you're trying to figure out what the balance is and is there a right way to parent? And the answer to that, just right off the bat, is there's not a perfect parenting style. There is a perfect style for each of your kids. So, depending on how your children react to particular things, is going to be how you're going to want to maneuver around them. Every kid is different. But when we are talking about specific crises that may occur in the development of children's lives, whether it be education, access to technology, access to communication at schools, being around friends of different backgrounds that may have a little bit more freedom than your kids do. And so, what do those conversations look like? How to maneuver kind of through those? What does good conversation and communication look like as opposed to wanting to be your child's friend or maybe having too many boundaries, too little boundaries? And so that's kind of really where you want to do your research and really start to hone in. That's what we're going to talk about today. It's not about, oh, this is the perfect solution. You should do this with all of your children, do A, B, and C. But we are going to give you some tactics that really do help in the process of being able to address some of those, let's just say, pebbles along the path that you're like, oh, I wasn't really expecting this. How do we maneuver around this? So let's talk about some of those. So there are two different columns when it comes to connection and communication. There are the emotional and there are the physical. And you hear me talk a lot in my other podcasts about the nonverbal communication that we give off. A lot of our just body language in and of itself communicates a lot of different feelings. And especially for teenagers, especially for young adolescents who they're not going to be straightforward with us. They're not going to be like, let me tell you everything about how I feel all the time. And maybe you do have one of those. And maybe you do have one of those and you're not a big talker. So there can always be different obstacles for different people. And so someone would go, oh, what a blessing your child talks to you. And you go, oh, I wish they would tell me less, So it just kind of depends on your kid. But there are two columns that are concrete. One is the emotional and one is the physical. And through the emotional, we really want to hyper focus in on the connection. We want to build empathy and understanding and trust. And so emotional should not fall into the way of really what can happen and did happen into the 90s, late 80s into the 90s, was that we built this fear factor into controlling our children through fear and saying things that are really emotionally triggering, but maybe are not as concrete. And so when kids can see through something that's not concrete, if they see it as an exaggeration, they're going to disregard everything you say. They're going to disregard anything that you have to bring to the table. So whatever you make up as a rule, my rule is whatever the rule was today is still the rule tomorrow. It doesn't change. So you can't wake up and be in a different mood and go, oh, well, today I'm okay with it. Whatever the rule is, that's the rule. And when it comes to household rules, they're really concrete. It's across the board. Doesn't matter if you're 5 or 15, the rule is the rule. We want to make sure that that's consistent so that the kids don't see favoritisms or be able to nitpick and say, oh, you treat him differently than you treat me, whatever that may be. Because in reality, those kinds of significant physical reactions will cause the emotional responses to people. And so your kids will disconnect from you because they feel that you treat one of them differently than the other. And so our whole goal in the emotional aspect isn't to say things like, if you don't clean up your room, then you're never going to see daylight again. Like, obviously they know they're going to see daylight again. They know that that is not going to be in any way, shape, or form an actual threat. And so it doesn't do anything but make them want to roll their eyes and walk away from you. And then you just get more triggered and it just becomes more of an issue. And so what I like to think of in communication when it comes to the emotional is not using fear tactics, but allowing the empathy and understanding and trust to build this line of access that we'll talk about in just a second. It's really encouraging them to want to come to us, feel safe to come to us to ask questions. The physical boundaries are built to communicate safety. We have boundaries like, hey, when you come in the house, lock the door behind you. Why do we do this? Because we don't want someone to just walk into our house. So those kinds of physical boundaries really help to identify safety, common sense development, social skills. We don't say this in public. Why don't we ask women what their age is in public? Oh, because it's disrespectful. Why is it disrespectful? And so we always want to explain. What we don't ever want to do is use the emotional response, which is because I said so, right? It's just another kind of control tactic. And so whenever we try to use these big voluptuous phrases that they're like the Trump phrases, right? They're just like, I'm going to trump everything you say with an authoritative disciplinary action. Instead, what we want to say is, hey, I am the authoritative, but in my authority, I'm going to explain to you why I make the decisions that I do. So when I put my foot down and I say, this is how it's going to be, you understand, okay, they're not messing around. This is serious. This is why it's serious. This is an actual like viable solution, and an actual valid concern. And so we want them to feel the validity in how we communicate. And that's how we connect. When you can trust what I'm saying, then I can learn to trust what you're saying, because you'll learn to communicate with me. When kids kind of see us start to manipulate the environment to our best interests, like, oh yeah, I tell my kids that so they'll leave me alone or whatever, they pick up on that. And so they'll also do that. They'll also use emotional tactics and physical boundaries to maneuver around you for their best interests. And by the time you figure it out, maybe you're now dealing with teenagers, you're like, we're already there. My kids have already used my tactics against me. How do we deal with that? We'll kind of dive into that here in a second. But ultimately, it's really because kids mirror, they watch, they listen to how you respond, your tone, your body language, your snarky comments, like all of those things they're going to pick up on. So our emotional and our physical reactions are really, really important because they're important on what we receive from our kids as well. And so in our step 1, we want to open a line of access. We want to think of an access deer, different spelling, but if you want to think of a deer, we want to do everything we can to not startle the deer away. But at the same time, we're not trying to befriend the deer. The deer is not our friend. It's not a human. It doesn't want to be our friend. But we definitely don't want to startle it away. And so the way we do that is we want to set up a goal. And that goal for you may look differently than goals for me, but it's not to ever bind the access for information, because that's where the harm really gets in. It's saying, like, for example, you can come to me anytime. And that's not just something that you say, that's something that you do. And so if you're on the phone and you're talking to your friend and your kid comes to you and says, Mom, I've had like a really bad day at school and I need to tell you something, you say, I gotta go. or you say, I'm so sorry, I'm going to put you on hold. I used to work for a political director, and he had a rule. It did not matter how absolutely vital our meeting was. It would be like so incredibly time strict. It was like, we need to deal with this right now. This is a huge pressing issue. And his two little twins would walk into the room, and it did not matter how intense that conversation was. Everyone's rule was to stop. We stopped talking. He completely lost eye contact with us. He would turn to them directly. He would get down on eye level and he would say, what can I do for you? And they'd say, I want to show you this picture I drew. And he would be like, that's amazing. What's in the picture? And he'd let them explain it to him. And kids have a very short attention span. And so it wouldn't take very long for them to go, oh, okay, like I'm over it. And they would leave. And then he would go right back to the conversation. But that was something to where that was just an understanding that we all knew and respected. And I really respected him for that. And so it's something that I've implemented into my own parenting, that I try to set realistic boundaries, like, hey, I'm about to get on a call, or maybe I'm about to record. So for the next 20 minutes, I want you to do some silent reading or something to that regard. So I help them to understand that I'm doing something important. But if something is more important to them, I want them to always know that they have that line of access to me, so that they always feel that safety to ask the bigger questions, the bigger concerns down the road. When you start when they're little, they'll continue to have that safety net. We want to, in step 2, define what is good early. And the best way to define what is good is to essentially not reward a bad behavior. And this can be really difficult when kids are little, because sometimes they do really funny things that they should not be doing. And the minute you laugh, the minute they continue to do that thing that they should not be doing. And after the second, third, fourth, fifth time, it stops being funny. But they've already had that affirmation. They've already had that confirmation that, like, oh, people think I'm funny when I do this. And so if we set that precedent early, you're going to see it move. And a lot of people will say, oh, well, kids outgrow that. They outgrow the funny stage. It's like, yes, but the underlying behavior doesn't. So if a child says a fable and exaggerates a story and everyone laughs, they'll learn later on into their older adolescence ages that they can also exaggerate stories to get a rise out of people. And so it just becomes this snowball effect. Boundaries still build a bond that communicates safety, but kids will use these emotional connections to test their boundaries. They'll say things to try to earn back the control, to gain back the control. They'll say things like, if you really loved me, you wouldn't do this. Or, please, if you want to be a cool mom, then you'll let me go and do this. And so they use these emotional tactics to essentially attack you and make you feel like, oh, I must be doing something wrong. I need to do this to build a connection and a bond with my child. And so you'll excuse a bad behavior in order to build a bridge. But that bridge ends you up on an island surrounded by water and nowhere to go. So you have to be really careful that where you're building bridges, that they aren't negative, ways to get yourself stuck somewhere else, and then you still have to recross that bridge later, and you have to undo a lot of negative things that you've already enabled and enforced. And so we have to be really cautious about what we say yes to. So setting that precedent of defining what is good early. We don't just say things like don't. We don't just say things like, you're not allowed to this, you're not allowed to do that, don't do this, don't do that. When we do that, they don't know the right thing to do. Kids are still learning, even into, sometimes it's hard when you're looking at your 14, 15, 16-year-old and you're thinking they should know by now. They don't know. Even into their early 20s, they don't know. They're still learning. They're still trying to figure it out. And so it's really important for you to give advice and guidelines with the what. Answer the what question. What is the good thing to do? And then we get into the next part of it, which is the why. Why is it the right thing to do? And once they've hit that age in their adolescence and they're young, they could be as early as 10, 11, 12 when they start asking those questions. It can be as late as their late teens. It could be even into their early 20s. You don't really know. Each kid is different when they start to have those questioning aspects. And I think the first thing that every parent does is they take a sense of self-responsibility, and it almost feels like a self-failure. You're like, why is my kid questioning everything that I say? Or why is my kid questioning their faith? Or why is my kid questioning everything they've learned? And the truth of the matter is, it's not a negative thing, it's a positive thing. The more that they are opened to understanding more fundamental facts about what they believe, the more concrete those beliefs can actually be confirmed, as long as we're prepared to actually do the work. And so, what we know about adolescents is that they lack the hormonal and emotional control to decipher a feeling from a threat. And so, when we allow them to try to quote unquote like figure it out themselves, they can't do it. We'll talk about that again here in just a second, but you really want to help them to decipher um, against and understand why these ideas that may be presented to them by other teenagers or other students, when you see them, your first reaction is to like freak out, right? You're like, oh my gosh, like when did you start doing that? Or when did you start, hearing that? Or when did you start listening to that music or whatever it is? Like, maybe like I said, for some people, it's going to be as simple as like, I don't like you listening to that music. For others, it's going to be like, when did you start having these conversations? And so it can be really hard for you to have the self-control to go, hang on a second, let me think about this, and to understand that they lack the hormonal and emotional control to decipher a threat. Now, the difficult part is that when we try to explain a threat as an adult who's already lived through this, who's already gone through this, you can get that like, sure, but that's never going to happen to me. Look, right? Every teenager does it. It's like, oh, that's just a story you heard on the news. Stop watching the news, mom, or whatever it may be. But you really want to find a way that best communicates the threat. The goal is not to convince them that it's a threat. And this is the part that gets really confusing for people, because they're like, my kids don't get it. My kids don't understand the gravity of how dangerous these online conversations are, or, having, being a part of these groups at school or whatever it may be. The goal is not to actually convince them of it. The goal is to say it so many times in such a receptive way that they hear it. And even if they condescendingly can finish your sentence, I'm okay with that. I'm totally okay with that, because you know what? They hear you. They hear you. And so later on, when they're in a really dangerous situation, or they hear something, or that little spidey sense kicks in and they go, I don't know if I should be here. I don't know if we should be doing this. They'll remember what you say. So again, it's not to convince them in the moment, because they don't sense the threat. Kids can't sense the threat, because they're so trusting of their environment. They trust all the adults around them. They trust all the kids have good parents around them. They don't understand the concept that they could be misled. And so it's not until they're in a situation where they feel like, I don't know, something about this doesn't feel right, that kicks in. Everything that you've talked about, everything that you've instilled in them, and they probably will come back and say, Mom, or Dad, I totally remember when you told me that, like that really like came to my mind in that moment. And so we want to implement those whys, right? Like we want to explain in a way that they'll understand. Don't talk over their head. Don't use scare tactics. Just say really simple things that they can remember, and say it so it's so obnoxious that they just are like, oh, okay, like we got it. And those things will help them in the long term, because someone who's looking for them online, or someone who's trying to have conversations, they're looking for that emotional immaturity, and they'll use it to their advantage. They'll say, oh, you're so mature for your age, or whatever it may be. And so they start to have these conversations. But if you've kind of already explained to them the whys, this is why we don't have online conversations, because these questions could be asked of you, these things could be dangerous, these things could lead to blah, blah, blah. And they're like, whatever, whatever, whatever. When that person starts asking those exact grooming questions, they're going to go, oh, that's kind of creepy. Like, that's exactly what my mom said you were going to ask, that kind of a thing. So we just are there to implement. We're just there to implant into their mind something they can implement into the future. Physical boundaries step in where we know kids cannot embody the skills to keep them safe. And so we can talk about how to implement those physical boundaries. And my 3 S's are show, share, and strive. So the first thing we want to do, obviously, is we want to show kids how to have proper communication, how to be respectful, how to help around the house, how to do all these things. Because if they see you do it, then they believe you when you ask them. But if you ask them to do something you've never shown to do, like if especially when we say like big things like, you can be anything you want to be, but they overhear you talking, with your spouse, and they're scared to go up for that promotion because they're like, oh, I'm probably not going to get it. Kids hear those things. And so you can't tell kids you can be anything you want to be. You can go to college and be anything you want to be, and then hear you be afraid. And so it's really important that our lifestyles are mirroring what we want for our kids, because they do pick up that anxiety. They pick up that fear. They pick up all of those things. And so we want to be that. And then we want to be able to share our stories, share our experiences, allow them to share information. Like, I have a thing with when we had our kids in school, my youngest in school, I had a thing where when I picked him up from school, it was like the minute that door closed, he was so trained to tell me exactly everything that happened in the day from start to finish when he was so young, because I just wanted him to get in the habit of telling me stuff, so that when the big stuff came up, when big conversations, when big questions came to his mind, he was never afraid to say, hey, this came up in our conversation today, Mom, and I didn't know how to answer it. Our oldest, I've built that repertoire with him. Like, I've built that connection to where he feels comfortable, to where he can come to us and he can sit down and say, hey, this question came up. I didn't know how to ask that. And so that's really what you want to do, is you want to be able to share and share and share, have this back and forth ebb and flow in your communication. And so kids don't just figure it out. Either you have to know what they are exposed to and have those hard conversations, or someone else will. Today, anyone from another student, a parent, or even a teacher can cross the line and define a safe action and what it looks like to them. Remember that everyone deems safety differently based on childhood upbringing or trauma. What you deem as appropriate for your home is not always the case, even amongst your closest friends. Make sure your kids know what your boundaries look like. And so in your showing them what it looks like, sharing, hey, I was at a slumber party, they're going to play a movie. Would you mind if I call my mom and just make sure that I'm allowed to watch this? Just being comfortable enough to share, and then just striving. This is the part that's like so difficult for any parent, is like striving to have restraint, because it is really hard for us, because we've already gone through it, to go, you just don't understand. Like, you haven't been through it yet. You're not an adult. One day when you're an adult, you'll understand. One day when you have kids, you'll understand. You don't get how stupid you were. You don't get how dumb that was. Like, you have to strive to create a balance in your communication. Striving to create a balance in your communication is not the same as befriending your child. Befriending your child is creating an open dialogue for inappropriate behaviors that are inappropriate, but you kind of smile and grit through, because you're like, I don't want to lose my friendship with my child. I'm scared they'll stop talking to me if I tell them that they're wrong. The truth of the matter is that when we show them positive behaviors, when we enforce those positive behaviors, when we share our life experiences, and then we strive to keep that open door of communication, that friendship is genuine. It is concrete. It's not based only on approval. And when kids get that friend to friend kind of behavior kind of going, they'll hold that over you with the sense of approval. Like, you and I are only friends as long as you approve everything I want to do. But going back to what I've said in an earlier slide, they do not have the emotional and developmental opportunity to know the difference between right and wrong yet. They just don't. They are so emotionally driven by whatever hormonal thing is going on, or what someone said about them, or what they feel about themselves, or their insecurities, or whatever it may be. That does not even fully develop into the brain until after 25. And so to even think that they can be in control is wrong. And when you make them feel like they're in control, you allow them the space to also think that they're in control in a negative environment as well. So if they're talking to someone they shouldn't, or they're in a relationship and they think, oh yeah, like I have all the answers to life, they can make really big choices that impact their future. And so step 5, when it comes to transparency, I like to think that the rule is, if I can't see it, neither should you. So if there's a fear of, oh, we got to turn this movie off because mom's walking in the room, or, like, I've got to put my phone down, I've got to delete this app every time I walk in the house because I can't let, mom and dad see it, then probably shouldn't be on it. When it comes to addressing a situation where you discover something that they are seeing or involved in, and it has become a secret, um, you know, it's such a hard place to be in, because there does have to be boundaries. There does have to be consequences. There has to be, because it goes back to those safety boundaries, those physical boundaries. And we have to be very careful that the emotional boundaries of being like, oh, I don't want to be a jerk about it, don't hinder our physical boundaries, which we remember that physical boundaries ultimately define safety. And so emotional boundaries are saying, I'm not going to do or say anything that's going to harm you emotionally, but I'm not going to allow emotions to dictate the fact that this is a physical boundary that's been crossed. You did something wrong, and so therefore we're implementing a physical consequence. And that does correlate to the brain as much as it does to the emotional psyche. And they may not get it right off the bat. They may be like, oh my gosh, this is an overreaction, or like, why am I being grounded, or whatever it may be. And that's just totally typical. You are expected to get some pushback. But you really have to start at square one when you find something. Like, if you're already in the process of something, you're like, I'm already dealing with this with my kid. You have to start at square one. You have to explain the why. You have to explain the, what we do, why we do it, why it's bad for you, all of those things. But again, you have to remember that your job is not to convince or to convert. And I think as Christians, we think that, like, it's not truly transformative until we see a transformation. Sometimes I like to think that the seed is planted so deep that over time it'll grow into something stronger than when we just sprinkle love on things. And so it's really important that we really set those boundaries clear with the, if I can't see it, neither should you. Now, we have 3 kids, and all 3 of them deal with communication in violently different ways. And hard subjects for some of my kids are like super easy. They're very open. They can have very detailed conversations, ask solid questions, be able to come to an understanding. I can walk them through, hey, you know what, like, this is why we don't do these things, and like, this is why it can be harmful to your relationship, and like, da 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 da. And like, it really does get that. And then, with some of our kids, they just live in this world of like, deny, deny, deny. And I hope that it will just, like, we just never have to have this conversation again. But the more they live in that space, the more we're going to have that conversation again and again and again and again, because you're hoping to implant it to where when they're in it, that they can hear your voice, that they can hear that process all the way through. Again, the goal is not to convert or convince. And so what does authoritative parenting look like? What are some of the things to implement? I think that some people think of authoritative parenting as a violation to privacy. As someone who has gone through trauma, has gone through sexual abuse at a young adolescent age, and understands the grooming process, it is so incredibly meticulous, and it is over such a long period of time. When it comes to true predators, they will take so much time, be so incredibly detailed, learn everything they can before they ever actually do anything at all. And so I really do believe that implementing some of these things are good. Again, this is just a framework of things that you can implement into your toolbox. If some of them feel a little much for you, then I'll leave that to your discretion. But search engine website blocks, especially for young children. And I say that because it's not even so much the content that they're watching, it's the ads in between. These short 30 seconds, 15 seconds of being able to have access to your kids and open them up to concepts and questions, and they're like, what is that? And you're like, oh my gosh, where did you see that? Oh, I saw it on a commercial. Oh my goodness. Okay, so now you're having these really big conversations that maybe they're not developmentally ready to have. And that's why I say that it's important. Phone screening, you know, phone screening is not like, hey, every Friday we'll be checking your phone. Like, that doesn't work. A phone screen is literally like they come in on a random day and you say, let me see your phone. What's your code? You go through the phone and they say, okay, great, you can have it back. And you may never have a conversation about some of the things on there. What you don't want to do is go and like freak out about every little thing on there. It's more of an informative. If you find something negative, then you have to address that with a physical consequence. It's really simple. Location tracking. I'm not a location tracking person, but my husband is. And so I see the pros and cons with it. One of our kids learned to share their location with other people. That really freaked me out. But then again, like, this is something that I guess was in the schools, like all their friends share their location with each other. That is super scary to me. So to her, it was not really that big of a threat. To me, it was very much a threat. But it was also something that could have almost been like commonly accepted because they're like, oh, well, we already have cell phone tracking on our phone. So this is one of those things where it's a do or don't for you as a parent. Like, do I like it? Do I love it? Or do I hate it? It works for some kids, not for everyone. Room sifting. I'm a big, big, big advocate for room sifting. I believe that it is extremely helpful in understanding where your kid is emotionally. There's so many times that you'll hear parents go, I had no idea my kid was struggling before they committed suicide. I had no idea my kid was on drugs. I had no idea. I had no idea. I had no idea. And then there's times when they did know, and that just things were not handled properly. Maybe they fell over their head. But when you're sifting, it is not a CIA raid. Like, you are not raiding the room unless they have something that is of grave concern and you bring it up to them and you're like, hey, I found this and we need to talk about this. This is alarming. And they can know that you're going through the room because it's not a big secret. You're not keeping secrets, but essentially it goes back to the rule of, if I can't see it, it probably shouldn't be in here. And if I can't find it, if I can't read it, it probably shouldn't be in here. So, room sifting can give you a good idea if your kids are struggling, hiding things, as far as like, it can be as simple as, taking mom and dad's prescription medications. It could be, hidden clothes that they're like changing into at school. It could be, it could be as simple or complex as it can be. I've seen it with all kinds of different things with kids, but ultimately it's a good idea, because I really do feel like there's a split second opportunity there to sometimes be able to capture something before something bad happens. I always think of the proactive thing to do. Do you want to be the parent that finds out, hey, this happened at school, hey, this happened to me, hey, I want to let you know I did this? Or would you rather your kids just be really ticked off at you for a day or two because you're like, oh my gosh, I can't believe you went through my room? So you have to pick which side of the coin you want to be on, because there is no other side. Like, you may have the kid who's like, go through my room, I have nothing to hide, like that's fine with me. But most of the time you're going to get some kind of pushback or some kind of like shock and awe, like, I can't believe you just went through my room. Again, you have to ask yourself, what am I willing to hear in exchange for not hearing my kid go, oh gosh, mom? Like, I'll take the oh gosh, mom, as long as my kids are safe, as long as my kids are alive. So car search it's the same kind of idea. Is essentially you're just looking for things that, and again, it's not even the component of what it is, because what you find, you can have a conversation about. You can totally have a conversation about it. It doesn't have to be an overreaction. We can say, hey, let's talk about this. Why do you have this? But the reason why you want to find it is because if they're storing it in their car, if they get pulled over, that pullover, that arrest, that negative response for and consequence in real life, may very well be the thing that changes the trajectory of their future. And so that part's really scary. That's why we car sift, because it's ultimately, I'm trying to protect you. I'm setting a physical boundary, not just for yourself, but for your future. You're not thinking long term, I'm thinking long term. So we can have a conversation about why I found this or why you have that, but more importantly, you don't have it in your car because it changes your entire future. Music and movie screenings, what's appropriate for you, because again, what's appropriate for you isn't what's appropriate for even your best friend at church. They may let their kids do different things, and so maybe they're allowed to play video games and you're not. Like, you just have to define what is appropriate for you and make sure that your kids understand and know, hey, you know what, my mom wouldn't be cool if I played that video game, or whatever it may be. Friend screening. I don't even think I really took this into consideration until one of our kids had a slumber party, and there was like, I don't know, 15, 20 students in our house. Every single one of those parents dropped their kid off at the curb. They walked up to the door. They were like maybe all of 10 or 11, and I never met a single parent. Not once. They never came and introduced themselves, never said, here's my phone number, never wanted to look inside to see, like, if we were crazy or if there was anything unsafe in the house. And it was mind-blowing to me. I was immediately so shocked that I was like, okay, we're like taking a different approach on this, because that's not okay. We don't want to do that. We want to know who everyone is that you're hanging out with, who their parents are, and how can I contact them, and all of those things. That was very important for me. Buddy system. The buddy system is a really cool concept, because essentially it sets you up for the idea of sending someone trustworthy with your kids. So if they're at a young enough age, but hey, they're going to go to a birthday party and they're like, oh gosh, mom, I do not want you to go and stay with me. And you're like, well, I'm not letting you go by yourself, because there may be other influences or things going on there that I'm not okay with. And so, is there an older sibling? Is there a younger sibling? Sometimes, like for me, my younger sibling had to go everywhere that I went. And it was because she was the most likely to go, yeah, that's a really bad idea, and I'm going to get in trouble with mom, so we're not doing that. And so it was really helpful to me, because I would always be like, yeah, let's go, I'm down for it. And she'd be like, yeah, no, I'm not telling mom and dad, so you're not going. And so it was really helpful. I know some people who have, just trusted family friends or a cousin or whoever it may be, that you're just like, if you're going to go, you have to take this person, because at least I know someone is watching you or is able to go to the restroom when you go to the restroom, or, whatever it may be. So that may be something that is helpful to you. Whatever you do, don't be afraid of the C word. And I say the C word is being cool. Like, you are going to have to essentially have conversations that are really uncomfortable and that will immediately make your kids go, oh my gosh, mom, this is so uncool. I can't believe we're having this conversation right now. This is so uncomfortable. So if you are scared of comfort, or if you're scared of being cool, I want you to just completely erase those two words from your vocabulary altogether, because again, I always boil it down to the trade. If you're going to be the uncool parent, or if you're going to be uncomfortable for about 45 minutes worth of a conversation, is it worth you not getting a call that you don't want to receive? And 99.9% of the time, everyone's going to say yes. Okay. Like, I can handle being uncomfortable having this conversation with my kid for 45 minutes if it means I'm not going to get the call that I will dread for the rest of my life. Autonomy supportive parents is fine for games, sports, play. What that means essentially is like, oh, kids will figure it out. Like, you got to let kids figure it out. I totally believe that in sportsmanship, playground play, like, let kids learn how to problem solve. When it comes to deciding key elements in their life that will define their future, that could impact their future, pregnancy, diseases, jail, anything that can correlate to those negative impacts that can really affect your future. Those are not things that we leave up to, like, kids will figure it out. Those are not the ones. Learning how to communicate with other friends on the playground, you can leave that to autonomy supportive parenting. I just want to, just encourage you guys that if you are homeschool parents or public school parents, we have different groups on our app that you can reach into and join with other parents and have conversations. Just say, hey, I'm struggling with this. Is anybody else struggling with this? Did you find something that you've implemented that has worked for you? And then take everything with a grain of salt. I really do think that not because one person did it with their kids will it work, because their kid may be very different than yours and may be very different reactive, and react differently to how they respond to that kind of impact. But it may be something that can be helpful. I know that some parents have told me, like, hey, like, this TikTok trend is going around at our school. Maybe it's going around at your school. Just thought I'd let you know. I'm like, okay, good to know. Lock up my jewelry, but like, it's just little things that you have to kind of sometimes almost open your ears to the uncomfortable, just so that you can be familiar with it. You hope that you never have to run into it. You hope you never have to use it, but it's in your toolbox. 3 simple verses I want to just throw at you here at the end that I hope support you. Verse to hang on to: as a father shows compassion to his children, so the Lord shows compassion to those who fear him. Psalms 103:13. I think it's important to embed in our kids the fear of the Lord. This is authoritative parenting is not about you being afraid of me, but it's about you knowing that God will reveal everything that is done in the dark into the light. And so, you're not hiding things from me. You're not doing things to me. You are ultimately God's. And so it's really important that they understand and fear that that's really the person you answer to. I answer to him too. And every action that I do, everything that I say, it also goes through him. So that fear is really important. No discipline seems pleasant at the time, but painful. Later on, however, it produces a harvest of righteousness and peace for those who have been trained by it. Hebrews 12:11. And the final one here is: start children off on the way they should go, and even when they are old, they will not turn from it. Proverbs 22:6. That's really where I get my philosophy for, being one that is just constantly truth telling to my kids. Not fear tactics, but truth telling to my kids in a way that hopefully in the future, somewhere down the line, somewhere in the wake of life, and I've already seen it with our oldest a few times, where he said something back to me and I'll go, that's my line. And he goes, yeah, it is. And I'll go, oh, okay. That's really cool, because you never think your kids are listening. And then all of a sudden you realize that they are. So no matter how uncomfortable it feels to keep repeating yourself, just know that you're doing it for a reason, and it isn't to convince or convert. It's just to plant that seed. I hope this was helpful for you, and love to hear from you on the app. Thanks so much, guys.